taking boarders?
No. No, the story I've got about two buddies right here. You may have heard this before. That over the period of time, I heard all kinds of excuses, you know, for being late or for not coming to work on time and so forth. And there were certain members that, not too far from me, but they played the edges quite a bit. And one particular time, one young man came to work, and I said, well, where's your buddy? He said, well, he's not going to be on today. And I said, why not? He said, he got run over by a car.
He sure did.
Got run over by a car. He said, yeah. I said, all right, keep going. I said, I've heard everything, I think. Well, he said, I'll tell you, he said, we double dated. And he said, we're going out to drive-in theater out here, of course it's no longer, but it was in West Ocean City. And he said, Jim and I had, Dan and Jim had both seen the first feature. It was a double feature. But he said, the girls had not. So he said, we decided we'd curl up in the back seat, let the girls watch the first feature, we'd go to sleep, then they'd wake us up, and at the end of the first feature, we'd watch the second feature with them. But he said, you know, he said, we're pretty big guys, and we just didn't fit in the back seat. So he said, Jim said, well, look, he said, I've got a sleeping bag here. He said, I'll just pull the sleeping bag out. You can have the whole back seat. He said, I'll stretch out. So he did. He hauled the sleeping bag out of the trunk of the car, got out and stretched out and got in the sleeping bag. About 15, 20 minutes later, some guy came in driving the car, watching the movie, and drove right on into the next parking space, right over the top of it. The doctor said if it hadn't been for a heavy sleeping bag, he'd have really gotten hurt.
Oh my God. Jim Kelly was there too.
Yeah, Jim was in there, a whole bunch of them.
Jim was there.
Well,
There was a bunch of us.
Art McSinsky's not here tonight, but one story I remember about him is I was driving my Jeep up the beach one day, and it was during lunchtime. And in those days, every other guard took off for lunch, and then when he came back, well, then the other ones take off. So we were stretched pretty thin. I was passing about 15th Street, and I looked up ahead of me. I had been standing talking. Art was no longer working as a patrolman. You know, once a lifeguard, always a lifeguard. And he was down there just for the weekend. And he stretched out on a blanket. So I stopped and I talked with him for a few minutes. And I happened to look up, and about a block and a half north, I saw a group of people getting in trouble, getting in a rip. So I said, Art, I said, I got problems up here. So I threw the gear in, threw the Jeep in gear. I took off up the beach. And of course, Art jumped to his feet and he started running right after me. Well, I naturally in the car, I got there first, slammed on the brakes and stopped, got out, and I didn't have a buoy with me. And the guard stand was between where I was and where we had to make the rescue. So I just hopped out, went in, dove into the ocean, and as Art came by, he grabbed the buoy, similar to the ones we've got over here. And,
very similar. A very authentic buoy that'll be up for sale.
So we got out there, and he said, look, he said, let's pull a two-man rescue. And I said, all right, I'll do the towing. And I said, you keep the girl on the buoy. There was a girl out there. And the way you do it, of course, is to have the one fellow stretch out and do the towing and do the kicking. And the other guy at the other end goes in behind the rescue. And he puts his arm underneath the armpits and closes them over the buoy and holds the victim up, keeps the head above water. So we got going. I wasn't making any headway whatsoever. So I called back to him. I said, Art, I said, I'm going to go parallel to the beach. I said, swing out. We're not going to try to make the beach. We'll go up the beach about another half a block. He said, go ahead. He said, no problem. So I'm with you all the way. So take as long as you want. So I was towing and I towed him. And finally got him in. We got to where we could stand. I realized when we all stood up why he told me he could take all the time I wanted. When he went around behind this young lady and slipped his arms underneath her armpits to get a good grip on, he didn't grab the buoy, he grabbed a couple of 38s. That was the way we were making the rescue all the way.
It's a good thing he's not here.
He's not here. All the time. All right, I don't want to take too much time.
I
spent most of my time in Townsend's drugstore, reading romance novels and drinking chocolate malts. So I don't know what you want me to say, Els.
Well, do you remember any of these guys, Lucky?
Most of your stories
Yeah,
you
what
can't
guys?
tell.
Any of these guys out here?
Oh, yeah. I think one of the funniest stories I can think of was Bob came down to get me one day and he said, George Shope hasn't even been able to go to lunch. So he's got about 2 or 3 bad rips off his beach. And he said, how about, I want you to come up and be with George, let George get something to eat and watch things. I said, okay. So got up there and the storm was offshore. We had a pretty good surf coming across the sandbar. And then it would bog down and then break again right on the beach. And it made a pretty good cut. So George went and got something to eat, came back, and we had a couple of pulls. Because he had about, I think it was about 3 bad rips. But then things quieted down a little bit, and George and I were leaning up against the guard stand, and a great big heavy-set guy came down on the beach and was going to go take a swim. And instead of going out past the first break on the beach and letting the breaker rush on past him and then break on the beach, and instead of standing back and let it break and rush up on him, he stood right where it was breaking and it peeled his bathing suit right down to his knees. And here's this guy, he'd had to be 250, 275, trying to get a wet bathing suit back up, and he's back to the water, and back to the people on the beach at the same time, and Shope and I are hanging on each other. We couldn't have helped this guy no matter what. But, George said, why don't you go help him? I said, I'm in the same shape you are, George. But that's the funniest one I can think of at the time.
That's pretty good.
But I think there was one more, and I can't remember who the guy was. I think Bob would remember. When we had down in the flat areas where we had buoys with long lines on them, and guard would pick up the buoy and take off, and the other guard would wait with the line. When they'd pull them back in. And who was it, Bob, that tied the line to the guard stand? When the other guy took the buoy.
I can imagine.
You remember that one? Well, that's what happened. The guy had a pretty good rope burn for about a month. And then the same thing almost happened with B.B. Smith. I don't think Fuzzy Sturman's here, is he?
No, he's not here.
B.B. took off with a buoy once, and Fuzzy was an extremely conscientious guard. He would walk the surf with the buoy like a cane. You know, I mean, the people knew he was on guard. You know, had this buoy, and he was always playing with the line. And this particular day, we had a group of people get caught in a rip, and BB grabbed the buoy, took off, and Fuzzy had the line wrapped around his wrist. And I was coming from the guard stand down in front of the Coast Guard station, and about halfway up, and I was going at a pretty good clip, about halfway up I saw BB just going into the water when his feet went out from under him. He went about that far off the ground and came down on his back, and he had a rope burn for about a month, I think. I got down there in time to help with the rescue and then keep BB from beating Fuzzy up. That's, you know, I could be up here all night.
Jerry, shoot, come up here.
One of the funniest stories I can remember, when I was first guarding, Els told me about how Bob had to work you out. And he was big then. And he jumped off
Real big.
and I thought I was going to die. But we turned him around and got him up to someone. And one of the first adventures I had, I was anxious to get somebody. So I had that can and I threw it over the wave and hit right back in the head, and knocked me out. Seriously. And then I had a confession to make a couple of years ago. Jim Lutzy was in the barracks one night, and someone poisoned his bathing suit with a certain ointment. And he didn't know about it until a couple of years ago that I was the guilty culprit.
It burned a hole in my bathing suit.
What, the analgesic bomb?
Wherever the hell it was,
Analgesic bomb's what it was.
Burned a hole in my
we
bathing
liberally dosed it, you know.
suit. Well, I have 3 children. All of them more or less normal. And so it didn't really hurt me.
Yeah, but he went out that barracks, because I live, my bunk was bunked. He went out that barracks, not a damn stitch of clothes on, heading for the water.
And one other funny one, I was on, I think on 3rd
But nobody
Street,
knew who did this. I mean, there were these little footsteps.
and Sam Fonte was on the next stand, and Ellsworth the next
Poured
stand.
atomic bomb on my bathing suit, or on me. That was the end of that, but go ahead.
And I was up there, we had a run, and Bob was on the bicycle, he used to ride that bicycle with her. And Sam Fonte was asleep, you came and pushed him off the stand, in the sand. You remember that?
No.
Oh, yes, you
I wouldn't
did.
do it.
But other than that, that's about all.
Well, one of the funny stories with Bob Hill, some of you guys may not remember Bob Hill. But Bob Hill, I think actually Bob Hill had been fired at this time, but he'd gone to work as a beach umbrella guy. And you look down the beach and you could see these semaphore signals coming up saying, Bob is coming, Bob's coming. He had made a raft of beach umbrellas, and he had a sail made out of an umbrella. And he had about, I don't know how much purple passion on board the ship. And he was sailing up, and some of the lifeguards, not myself, but some of the lifeguards swam out. Bob would give him a couple of shots of purple passion, and then he'd sail on up to the next beach. By the time he got to 14th Street, where I was, he had probably 12 beach mats and about 50 beautiful girls trailing behind him as he came up the beach. And this was one of the more memorable scenes I ever saw, with Bob Hill retiring from the Beach Patrol, retiring from Ocean City. I would like the record to show that he is a responsible executive with Virginia Power.
Yeah.
I think he's vice president for personnel.
He was senior vice president for senior LEPCO, but he retired.
But he retired. But so if your power goes out, don't call Bob Hill. But what I really think, I think is I asked Danny before I came whether Skeeter was going to be here. And some of you, those guys who were involved in this at the time, knew that I had a fairly close, strong emotional attachment. Well, it was going off with a girl whose name was Pat Waller. And I heard that there was a guy named Skeeter who had been dating Pat. I was at Maryland, and Pat was at Radford College, and she had been dating a guy down there. And so I thought, oh, hell with that doesn't matter. And then it turned out that Skeeter Anderson was going to come and work on the Beach Patrol. So I decided what I was going to do, the primary objective of my next year was going to be punch out Skeeter. That was what I was going to do. I was going to come back. So Danny said, you better watch out. He's a pretty big guy. I said, well, all right, we will have this out. But the point is, we went to a beach party shortly after we got here, and we decided we were going to walk off into the dunes, and we were going to get this settled. And Skeeter said to me, I don't care that much. You care that much? And I said, no, I don't care that much. So we said, well, the heck with it. The hell with it. Let's be buddies, and let's get on like lifeguards. But the point of the story is that I was here, I think, for 4 or maybe 5 years. All of the guys got along. Everybody got along. It's some of the most, and this is the reason these things are fun, because all of us got along. Yeah, Jerry, you hazarded the possibility of my having children, but I forgave that. I didn't worry about that. But everybody got along. Everybody had a good time, everybody had a single objective, and Bob focused us on being serious and on saving people and on being responsible people on the beach. Once the day was over, we had a good time, but I had never been with a group of people, and I've been with a number of organizations, and I've never been with a group of people that universally got as long as well, had as good a time, were able to focus when the sun went up and we had to be out there, we had a job. And Bob, I think it's a great credit to you. You were a wonderful model for us on how a disparate group of people could get along, could do their job, and could have a good time. And so I think this is a remarkable group, and we, all of you, and it came together. We came from, I was from a jerkwater town like Salisbury, and there were people from really sophisticated, there were people from sophisticated places like Boulder, and there were people from Berlin, where's Jimmy go? But we all got along, and everybody had a good time, and we did our job. And Bob, that's a credit to you. You gave us a lesson for life. That's right. And I think that's why we're here tonight. So Bob, thank you, buddy.
Because 3 years ago I failed to acknowledge everybody. I failed to acknowledge Jack. Jack has a place in Ocean Pines, and he goes to Leesburg in the winter. We met when he was an administrator in Harford County, Maryland, at a school, and I was at Towson University with student teachers. And Jack donates his time to, what is the term, Angels? What's it?
Angel Flight.
Angel Flight, where he actually he's been flying for many, many years, and he actually flies cancer and other patients to places that they can't afford to go to, and also sometimes there are emergencies where he's pulled out of bed in the middle of the night to take somebody somewhere who really got to get to the hospital, and the only way to go is in this small plane immediately.
That's great.
Back to lifeguarding, I appreciate the experience I've had here with Captain Craig. I guarded with his son on 9th Street, and 9th Street was a key street, as I recall. So it was a wonderful honor to be at 9th Street with all the college and the high school kids, and enjoyed that with his son next to me for a couple of years. About 57 to 62, I think.
You may be interested that his son was also on the patrol, third generation on the
Excellent, excellent. But some of the experiences, there were many, of course, and I can remember one that particularly stands out in memory. We used to play football up on 2nd Street sometime on Friday night, and the tourists used to come and enjoy the football games. And some of the guys were really college stars, and they would come and for University of Maryland, Syracuse, and some of the leading colleges, and play out there with touch football, and it'd be a big crowd there. So after the football game, we would then sort of cool off, and it was a tradition to swim out to the 1 mile buoy out at the inlet. If you go down the inlet now, you can still see that buoy out there. Well, after an hour and a half of playing on the sand, and an hour, a full day of guarding, you were a little bit tired. So we got out there, I can remember one particular evening, and the tide was rather unusual that night. I guess there were about 15 guards that swam out to this buoy. We got out to the buoy, and the habit was to get up on the buoy and rest, because you were exhausted. That particular night, Captain Craig, I want you to know I brought a buoy with me, because I said, that's a long swim, I'm tired, I'm going to grab a buoy. So we went out, we were climbing up on the buoy.
That buoy that we're going to auction on.
That buoy right there.
It's going to be for sale.
That's the one. We climbed up on the buoy, and I guess there were about 12 of us on it, and some guys were climbing up. And we're laying on this buoy, trying to relax, and all of a sudden, I swear to God, leeches were on this buoy. And we looked down, and these leeches were coming up our arms and crawling onto our bodies. Well, the guys said, well, this is ridiculous, we're exhausted, right? So we flopped back in the water. The current, the tide's coming in, we got swept in the inlet. Now this is a great headline, if the paper hit this, it didn't, thank God. Lifeguards swept in the inlet, into the bay. Coast Guard rescued some, others were saved. So here we are, the guards sweeping in the inlet. And thank goodness it didn't hit the Baltimore Sun, because that would have wiped out the weekend, I think. But anyway, Captain Craig the next morning had a little meeting with us and said, I've never been so embarrassed in my life for the lifeguards of Ocean City to be swept in on the tide and be saved by some of the Coast Guard. So I don't know whether that was remembered or not, but that was something I always remembered. The second story I remember too, Captain Craig always had a rule: you didn't have beer on your beach. And I used to have a clean beach, used to pride myself in that. This particular one time, Friday, he came by and he said, "You got a clean beach, Levering?" I said, "As always, Captain, no problem." And I'd been dating a young lady who worked, her dad was vice president of National Bow. And this particular evening, she thought I'd had a hard week and it would be nice to have a six-pack on my stand. Well, she came up unbeknownst to me and left a lovely little container, ice pack, a six-pack there. And he said, "Well, what's that little container there on your stand?" I said, "What container?" I got down and he opened it up, six-pack of beer. He said, "Okay, 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, let's go. You're going to swim blocks for those beers." I think it was one block for beer, wasn't it, Captain? I forget. Well, maybe I diminished that, but it was a heck of a long swim. I remember that. So, it's been fun, and as Elle said, I did go into flying. I've been flying for about 30 years, and I flew banners up and down the beach, from Delaware up and down. So from the lifeguarding, I went to a little higher up and looked down on the guards as I flew. And,
Good.
and it was fun.
Very good.
He is the one on the left-hand side, the right-hand side, right here. That's Bill when he was younger.
Oh my God, are you kidding me?
A lot smaller, but just talking to a lifeguard.
A lifeguard.
That's the buoy.
That's it.
I think,
And on the striped suit.
okay, I think I'm qualified to introduce Bill. I'll tell you why. My first year with 45, and another guy and I hitchhiked to Ocean City after school was out, and rode surf for a while, and this guy could play the piano. So in the evenings we'd go along to the hotel that had a piano in the lobby, and he would sit down and play the piano, and the girls would crowd around. That's how we met the girls. This guy decided to go back to DC, and I decided Ocean City was the place that I needed to spend the rest of the summer. So the lady at the rooming house where I rented a room had kind of taken a liking to me, and she found out I was a competitive swimmer and had done life saving before. So she suggested that the beach patrol needed lifeguards, and told me that they met up on the beach at early in the morning. So I walked up the next morning and I saw this big guy standing there, and I walked up and asked him if he needed any lifeguards, and he said, "Can you swim?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I can swim." And he said, "Well, you'll have to prove it to me." And I said, "Okay." And so that afternoon we went for a swim out in the surf, and I showed him that I knew how to get out of a hold or two. And so he gave me a job, and that was Bill Pacey. Bill Pacey was, I think he was maybe 6 months older than I was, and I was 16 years old. And he was the first guy I worked for, and he was a good guy to work for. And even though we haven't seen each other for many, many, many years, I still consider him a close friend.
There you go. We used to wrestle on the beach.
Now
This was all an edge.
This is all BC, it was before Craig. And I was during the war, and Jim Parker was captain in 1943. And I was working at the drugstore as a senator. And that brings up another story that I'll tell, but I went out at 6th Street, and asked me if he needed a lifeguard, and he said yes. He didn't ask me how old I was. I was 14. And he said, can you swim? Same thing, you know. Yeah, let's go out in the water. And I tickled him under the arms. He let go of everything, and I was hired. And no problem. But the drugstore reminds me of a story that when I was a soda jerk there, and I started there when I was 12. And in those days, we used to work from 8 in the morning till midnight, 7 days a week, as a soda jerk. We get an hour and a half for lunch, hour and a half for supper. Made $22 a week or something like that. And on rainy days, when the crowd was not coming in, the people on the pharmaceutical side would say, hey, Pacey, you know, take care of everything. We're going to get some supper. So they do that. And pouring down rain one time, this guy comes in, he goes over to the cigar counter. So I left the soda jerking spot, and I went over and I said, can I help you? And I think I was about 13 or 14. And he said, yeah, I'd like some prophylactics. And I said, well, okay. And I turn around and I see this display of toothbrushes. I turned back and I said, what color would you like? And he turns around and walks out of the drugstore. That was my experience at the drugstore. And the other one was, I think it was about 1945. We weren't making a lot of money, and we started to clean the beach, and we started collecting all the oil that was left on the beach, you know, sunburn oil that people would leave on the beach. So we used to bring it down to the Coast Guard station, and I got a big 5-gallon vat, milk can, and put it in, put all the oil in, all the sunburn oil into it. And then I went down to Dr. Townsend at the South store, and I said, Doc, I need 2 cases of small bottles and some labels. And he gave them to me, and we went back and we put iodine in the vat, which made the coloring perfect. And then we filled up these little bottles, and we had labels put on it that said guard oil. And then we each take about 5 or 6 of these guys up to the beach, and people come up and say, where'd you get that tan? Guard oil. And we sell it for 50 cents. And you know, that improved it. And the only other...
How big was the beach at that time? I mean, when we talk about the beach,
it was half the size of the beach I saw today. Half the size. And we had, you know, the wooden jetties, or the pilots.
But where was the furthest?
16. Oh, it went to Commander.
14th Street. 14th.
Yeah. 14. And there was a guy named Gordon Shipley. Anybody ever heard of Gordon Shipley?
Horseface.
Huh?
Horseface.
No, that was Gordon Curley. Anyhow, the other highlight, I guess, of my 7 years was 1945. We had rented the Pier Ballroom for the lifeguard dance, and we picked a date, and it was August the 14th, 1945. And that day, of course, they announced the end of World War II, the VJ Day. And we all went to the Pier Ballroom, and if I'm not mistaken, and Barton, maybe you were there, Puddin, excuse me, I'm sorry, Puddin. I think we had Stan Kenton, I'm not sure. And we'd gone all out. And that party lasted all night. The governor was there, and senators were there, Dallas Sandwich was there from Baltimore. And we made about $125 a piece, which was unknown in those days. And, but all I can say is that my years, I can't think of anything other than going to 4 years at Washington League that was as much fun as working with a bunch of guys on the beach. And it wasn't 350 of them or 150, whatever they got. It was about 15. And everybody knew everybody. Everybody helped everybody. And then Bob came along and made it a professional situation in 1946. Thank you for everything.
Bobby Bounce was a beach umbrella boy. If they needed any beach boy, no. He says, but I think they need lifeguards. And I mentioned it to Bob, and Bob said, well, I've seen you swim. Why don't you try out for the lifeguards? I said, well, I don't know how to do those breaks and holds. He says, I'll teach you. And he says, and I'll show you how to do the buoy run. So he did, and that's how I got on the beach patrol.
It was a good one. So, yeah, I worked there too. I think most people had an afternoon or an evening
job that worked a little bit. I worked there a couple nights a week, and Ellsworth was there working in Lambros. And we went out and worked for a few days, and sure enough, we got on the beach patrol. And I think at that time, pretty much everyone worked out at the racetrack in the evenings when they were had the races out there. Bob worked out there and managed to get us all jobs. And I remember my first summer here, I worked all summer. And one of the things I remember looking at the handout they gave us yesterday, people get $10.50 an hour for the training program. Well, if they work for half a day from 8 till 12, they made exactly as much as I made in a week. I remember the pay was $43 a week. That still sticks in the back of my mind. But those were good years. I think we all learned an awful lot. I think we grew up, and I think every one of us here really owe an attaboy and a thank you to Bob Craig for the work he did with us and with the Beach Patrol. So my hat's off to you, Bob. We enjoyed it.
Bob, by the way, is a retired captain, U.S. Navy, and I discovered him through writing through to the U.S. Naval Academy. George Ross, where's George? George here. George Ross. Blondell brought. Oh, George, come on, let's see it. Come on.
I'm gonna tell one story about these two characters' best friends. A guy named Vernon Beck. Vernon was a real character, to say the least. Very athletic, and I think he was part monkey. Well, there was Art had a girlfriend, and who would wear a leopard skin bathing suit. Vernon was up on top of his stand one day, standing on his hands, and here she comes walking up the road. You can see Vernon. Now we thought he was dead.
And that girl was named Becky Peckiness.
We knew her. We knew her.
She's close to the Black Rose Society. You've got to tell the story. Come on, please.
Come on, Kelly, get up there.
Come on, Kelly.
Russ Hawkins and the T. Russ Hawkins.
Yeah, you gotta tell that
I
story.
wasn't there when that happened. I heard about it, I really wasn't there.
Come on, Kelly.
You know the story. Would you tell it?
Well, you tell it.
But no, come on.
Well, I've been up there long enough.
No, come on, just tell the story.
I'm getting old, God can't, gotta sit down.
All right, Russ.
Are you talking about when he,
No.
You were there too.
that was in
Russ
Lauderdale.
That's right, exactly.
We'll make a
And my wife knows more about that than I do.
No, I don't.
There-
Different time.
It was in her,
There was
her
heavy
part.
drinking at the Casamona Hotel in Fort Lauderdale. A lot of us-
That's right,
A lot of
yes.
us came from Ocean City, lifeguard for Lauderdale in the wintertime, and a lot of heavy drinking at the Casamona Hotel. And poor Russ, he had one too many, and he got very sick. He went right to, and he lost his false teeth down
Right
the
in the
toilet.
toilet.
He was walking around without his front teeth.
That's true story.
So he made enough money to
Tell about
Don Hunt, you want to tell it? Don, tell us
Donnie?
what's Don.
A couple of the stories, I remember. Is it okay if I stand in?
That's fine.
And tell me about my voice isn't carrying. I used to be a loudmouth. The one about your colleague finding useful appendages in a young woman's rescue. I remember you telling that before, which reminded me of a similar story. When I was, and this sort of has a culinary flavor about it too. We used to get the best meal of the day. It was at the hotel in front of which we were the guard. And I had just come from hearty, but I remember those meals were ample. And I was just coming up on that when I noticed
some people going in the water. One was the umbrella man and his girlfriend. So I figured that they were okay, they knew their ropes. But then they began to get out farther and farther, and they eventually yelled for help. At which time I was already running, lunch and all. And I got out there, and they did need help. As a matter of fact, we were in the worst rip tide I had ever had experienced. And just about that time, I thought my guard to the north of me had gone to lunch, but he apparently came back early. And he said, "Bart here up front, I'll go get him." Yeah. Fortunately, Bart saw that what was happening and came with a buoy. That one there. And we started bringing people in, and it was kind of scary because people kept going the other direction. And I kept blowing my whistle because I wanted more help. Bart said, "What are you blowing the whistle for?" But we finally got them all ashore. And we had to use actually a human chain of people. The undertow was so bad. And I was kind of tired, and that lunch was just sitting on my stomach when the umbrella man and his girlfriend came up to give me something in thanks. It was a vanilla milkshake. Bob never took me out in the water, and I never knew quite why. So I figured maybe he was afraid of committing an unintentional homicide. He may have not quite had any confidence building when he asked originally, "Can you swim?" And I asked him, "How deep is the water?" But the appendix one, I lost my track there. I was standing on the beach watching the water, and one of the older men who used to come up and talk said, "How do you know when someone's in trouble?" And I said, "Well, you know, you just keep watching. You can see somebody in trouble, like that man right there is turning blue." So I went in, and sure enough, he was in trouble. He was trying to dog paddle to stay up, and he couldn't respond. So as I went to lift him up, he was in the space between the sandbar and the shore. Occasionally that was over your head. And his trunks were down around his ankles. So I was more shy in those days. I didn't need to use that appendix to get him up on the sandbar. And I just pulled his trunks up. He still didn't say anything. And I got him back to the beach. And I think an ambulance came. But the gentleman who was I had been talking to said, "You didn't have to go to that extreme." Last time, everybody spoke accurately about what an influence you were on them. I didn't say so because I felt I still had I'm still having a lot of work to do to become a man. But you did certainly teach me responsibility and a motto, pay attention, which is useful in any part of life, really. And you demonstrated it one day when you were still using a bicycle up and down the beach. And I'm afraid I was listening too hard to the All-Star baseball game. So when I did look up, there was Bob bringing in someone from the far reaches of my beach. And I wasn't aware of it. So I was really impressed by that, and I was further impressed by the fact that there was a trail from the bike to the shore of Bob's clothing. A moccasin, a sock, a shirt.
Absolutely.
I think he would hold the record in time in getting the boardwalk to the water. So thanks for that, Bob.
I don't see the Booze, Mr. Booze or the Blondell brothers. Have I missed them? Wagner, is the Wagner here?
Danny Wagner's here.
There's another Wagner. The gentleman from 1935, would he say something? Would he want to say something? Would you want to say?
Yeah, come on. Stay there.
You can speak from there if you want. You can speak from there.
I don't really have much to say. I remember most things. I remember when we earned $2 a day or $14 a week when I was a lifeguard.
7 days a week.
7 days a week, yes.
Right, no break, 7 days a
7 days a week.
Captain got 15.
Huh?
The captain got 15.
Yeah.
Got $1 extra.
Yeah, well, my memory's not what it used to be. I really can't tell you much about what happened. I'd like to, but I don't remember anything.
What was the beach coverage? How many beaches did you cover?
Oh, 2 usually. I mean, we had one beach between jetties. You know, I used to take another beach over to his side. As usually, but later on we got more guards. We had one guard on each beach. And all I remember mainly is I was down at the end beach one time, and in those days the black people had to stay all the way down. So they weren't out on the beaches. They were down, so they were sort of under my territory. And I went over there and got 1 or 2 out a couple of times because it was next to my beach. There wasn't anybody else to look at. So, and of course that changed, obviously, in the years to come. It was, what was that, 1934, 35? 35. Of course, things are a lot different than, thank God, than they are now. I mean, thank God you're better now than they used to be then. I don't really know what to say. Do you know? It's my wife, Jim. If you got any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Can I ask a question? How'd you become a lifeguard?
How did I become a lifeguard?
Yeah.
Yeah, that puzzles me too.
Puzzles all of us.
I don't even remember trying out for anything or anything. I remember being up in, who was it, Bob Craig?
Yeah.
I think
And Carrie.
1930.
1930?
This was 1934.
1930 it started.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I don't remember too much say about that, tell you the truth.
How many lifeguards were there when you were?
When I was on,
Yeah.
I don't think there was more than 8.
Get a free lunch at the hotel behind. Or in the hotel behind you, right?
We probably stayed there for nothing if we got that. No, we paid, like I said, $2 a day or $14 a week. In those days, wasn't anything to brag about. It was better than nothing. So, but
Some, there had to be more than 8, according to these pictures.
oh, maybe there was. We each had a beach, so I mean between jetties. How many were there? 15.
But Bob, in 46, you only had 16 or
Yeah,
something.
that's right.
So you-
It probably wasn't
Isn't
more
that
than 10 or
Uncle Sam?
12.
Do you know Uncle Sam?
I don't think there was much more than 12.
He had Uncle Sam.
My brother-in-law was on the first beach patrol, Sam Temple. And,
Who?
Sam Temple.
Hey,
And there were 6 that started out.
I can start
that
on
little
that.
before
Ellis.
my time, I think.
Yeah.
Everybody used to use the beach right in front of the Coast Guard station, for the simple reason that that's where Shallow's bathhouse was, right behind it.
Right.
And down for the dayers used to come change their suits in Shallow's bathtub, get that big S on their black suit, and they go right out in front, because the Coast Guard was on duty 24 hours a day up in that little tower. Well, in 1930, they had a storm in the spring of that year, and the beach washed out. And so the mayor got together with the chief of the Coast Guard station, and they decided that people could no longer use that particular beach in front of the station because it was completely washed out. And so they began going farther north. So they hired Edward Lee Carey, whose mother owned the Del Mar Hotel, was an Ocean City boy, and he was the lifeguard. But it only lasted about 10 days because they realized they needed more than one. So they got a hold of John Laws, and John Laws was added on weekends. Well, about another couple of weeks came by, and it got to the 4th of July, and they needed still more. So they got a hold of Sam Temple, and they got a hold of an All-American football player from Maryland. Can't give his name right offhand, but several others. But well, one of the Ducarts was on, yeah. One of the Ducarts was on anyway. Well, Edward Lee stayed as captain in 1930, 1931, 1932. 1933, Edward Lee left the patrol, and John Laws took over as captain. And he had, I think, probably 7 altogether. But you're right, that everybody had really an effective 2 blocks, because the stands were right about where the pocketbook was, and one beach, and there'd be a jetty here, a jetty there. So the guard that was sitting here was responsible for that beach, half of this one, and half of that one. And then the guard over here was responsible for the other half of this beach, his own, plus half of the one on the other side.
And now there's how many guards
Now
guarding the beach?
now they run about 200 guards altogether.
I was gonna say,
But,
there's probably about 6 guards in
yeah,
that
but
space.
I have a picture on the wall at home when Harry Kelly was captain in 1935, and there were 7 at that time. And that included Tommy Ducart and Harry Kelly, who let's say was captain. Milton Connor, and Collins Elliott, and I had the picture, I can tell you their names, but I can't right offhand.
Were there lots of pools, Bob? Did a lot of people have a lot of
Well,
pools?
don't forget, if we had 1,000 people in Ocean City, we had a big crowd in those days.
That's true.
I mean, really, it didn't have that many.
No
Of course, you had that
torpedoes.
circular buoy, that buoy about yay big, so you couldn't throw it,
Those things
you
are
couldn't carry it
ridiculous.
through the waves. I mean, it was a mess, until we got this one over here. But as far as I know, there was no official testing until I got on in 1935, and I first, well, of course, then went on, had Jim Parker and Bill, captain, and Edward Lee came back in the late 30s. and he was captain again in the late 30s. And then the war came along, and I think Jim Parker was in there, and Tommy Price and so forth. And when I finished my master's at the University of Pennsylvania, the war was over and everything, I came back in 46, and then I stayed on. And I started, at that point, an official testing program, which was real simple compared to what it is even today.
Simple? Deadly. I mean, I didn't think it was simple. Everybody's terrified of going out in the water with Bob Craig. Bob, whom we privately refer to as the great white whale.
That's right, that's right, that's right, that's right.
Whoa.
The walrus.
The walrus. I mean, God. Going out with Bob was tantamount to going to death.
It was 60-degree water.
It was his legs when he wrapped them in lock.
60-degree water.
It was a simple test. If you lived, you were on.
You should mention Charlie Austin had this made
Oh,
up.
yeah, it was Charlie Austin.
He can't be here tonight.
From Frederick, Maryland, couldn't be here tonight. He had a previous commitment to go to Europe, and he redid that entire buoy. He
sent it to me last week, and then
This
authentic, original
1945
buoy. And if you look on the pictures that were handed out over here, one of them, I think, has that buoy on it.
No, I think you have to bid on the buoy. That is simply a ticket to let you bid.
And I wanted to say this.
Look at the picture over here, and there's one picture that has all these buoys stand in a row. It's just like that.
And I wanted to say this before I forget, behind every great man is an even greater woman, and that's Jenny Craig.
I've already told you some about this, but Bill Booth brought me a copy of the lifeguard dance booklet. That we used to put out an advertising booklet every year when we had the lifeguard dance. And some of you know we had some pretty big bands that came in and played the lifeguard dance. And this particular booklet they gave me tonight was dated August 23rd, 1940. It was the night before we were married, on the 24th of 1940. We had our 63rd wedding anniversary about a month ago. But another thing too.
Did you give her a test the next day?
No, we had a date for the lifeguard dance that night, and her father made me have her home by 12 o'clock. We were married the next day at 4:30.
That was pretty liberal back in the
Skeeter
day.
Anderson. Skeeter.
I'm hiding.
Huh?
I'm hiding.
Who else have I missed now? I know who else would like to come up and speak?
Goodwood.
Barb.
Come on.
I'll just stay back here. I worked 47 through 49. We were making 35 hours a week then. What you said was true. The first time I went out with Bob, and he said, we're just going to take a swim. So we went out somewhere from the pier to Division, somewhere out there. We went out, and we were swimming up the beach, and all of a sudden he grabs me, and I thought, holy Christ, scared the hell out of me. And had me under the water, and was thrashing around, and trying to get away from him and everything else. And came up for air and all, and then we did a few more laps up there, and all of a sudden he grabbed me again. Well, that was my indoctrination. And I tell you, I was scared. Well, he was a big man. But we had a lot of fun. And I certainly think he was more like a father image to all of us. There were about 6 or 8 of us that lived in a house down on 3rd Street at that time. And it was a lot of laughs. And we had the house to ourselves, and of course it was always a mess. And we get off duty at night, we run down, we have a bunch of beers, we run down 3rd Street and play softball for a while. Then we'd all go back and change clothes. We all had jobs, either attending bars, short order cooks, or something like that. So I worked at Jackson's as a bartender. I worked at Bernie Lee's as a short order cook. I worked out at the Lagoon as a bartender. And all. Then we'd get off work, and then we'd all have dates, and we'd all go up to the beach. And then we'd get back and get a couple hours of sleep and then be out on the beach again. But it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of camaraderie, and it was a great bunch of guys. And I looked at the picture, and a number of them aren't here right now, but couldn't have been a better time of my life. And he was certainly taught all of us a lot of things.
All right, as a historian, which is my profession, but also as a professional huckster, which is sort of selling things, making money, we have right now an opportunity for people, all of those who, has everyone here bought a ticket?
Here's the bidders list.
All right, you have to buy a ticket. If you want to be a player, it's like buying a program to watch the game. You got to buy a ticket if you are going to bid on any of these items. I want to remind you what the items are. You've heard at least 12 times about the most historic lifeguard buoy possible. It's right over there. And we have, would one of the ladies show off our lifeguard buoy? Betty? Show off our lifeguard buoy.
Betty.
She was two-stepping. You know the proper lifeguard buoy demonstrate. No. Okay. Just sort of hold it. No. Well, yeah, and then hold it up, and then walk over here. Then hold it up. Walk over there.
Oh, you want me to show it?
Yeah.
Yes, right.
And then walk over here, back over here. This is an authentic 1945 lifeguard buoy. It was here before, I mean, everyone here probably can identify with this buoy. You may have carried it out, you may have watched people carry it out, but it is a real lifeguard buoy. That's one thing you can bid on, but you got to buy a $10 ticket to bid on. Okay. The other thing, okay, put it over, Daddy, put it over here.
I'm gonna take it with me.
I'm working with amateurs here. 220, 225, I hear from the lady on the left. 225 from the lady on the left. Here, 220, 220, 225, 225, 230. Do I hear 230? I think you're bidding 225. Do I hear 230? I hope I don't hear 230. Well, but I will hear 230 if I hear 230. 230, 230, 230, 230.
Bill, 230.
230.
What's the bid? Who's got it left?
She had.
Marge has 225.
225.
I'll take 230.
225, 230.
I had 225.
All right.
Anything over that?
Marge, you want to go 230, right? 225, 220. I'll go through this routine. 230, that would help. Say 230. 230, 230, 230, 230, 230, 235, 235, 237, 50, 235. 235. Does anybody have a drink around here? 235, 235, 235. I hear 240. All right. 240, 240, 240, 240, 240, 240, 240. Do I? What did I say?
You
Did
said
you bid 240?
You did.
Marge got 240.
240, 240, 240,
Bill's
240. Bill,
Right, hold it. Right now, you got it for 240, right? Right.
It's at 240 now. 240, 240,
Your bid,
240,
Bill.
240, your bid.
Oh my gosh.
250, 250. Look at this. Listen, somebody else made, you can see how valuable this is.
They don't make them anymore.
They don't make them anymore. This is on authentic, on absolutely. Anyone else, please help me. I don't want to bid against Bill any longer, but we are now at 250.
And for a measly $10, it can be yours.
For a measly, well, it could be yours. 245.
Oh, you're gonna buy for $245 and give it to us?
Oh, no. It's a deal. Wait a minute.
confused.
I'll bid, I want it for $2.50, but I'll give it to you for $2.50.
Oh my gosh.
What a deal.
I'll give you 50 cents, Bill.
All right, quit and give me 50 cents, I'll do it.
You got it. Okay. $2.50.
Yes, forgive this. Way to go, Jim.